and I'll introduce myself because some of you won't have met me before. I'm Kate Rosette. I'm a certified Iyengar yoga teacher, and I'm the founder of Yoga Branches. And I built Yoga Branches and created Yoga Branches a few years ago because I really wanted to provide a service that supported people in their home yoga practice. So there was a lot of people attending classes and wanting to do yoga at home but not knowing how, or perhaps they'd started a home practice but it just wasn't happening. So I'm really focused on supporting people in their home practice. That's how Yoga Branches begun, to support people in creating a consistent and inspired home yoga practice. And those two words are really important to me: consistency, so it's happening every single day, and that it's interesting and you're motivated and inspired to do it. So that's how Yoga Branches begun. And I offer that kind of support in a whole range of ways through perhaps the private Facebook group that many of you are part of, or through a membership program, through challenges, and all different ways. As another program under the Yoga Branches canopy, shall we say, I also have a program which is called the Peer Practice Program. And that's a program for teachers and trainees where we all come together and practice together in preparation for assessment. So I'm going to tell you more about that program at the end and give you and invite you to join me in that program if you'd be interested to. But that's a little bit about Yoga Branches, about who I am and where I've come from. And I can see a couple of people now popping their comments into the chat. Excellent. So we've got people from, so far, significantly from New Zealand and Australia, because it's probably a good time zone for you guys. And everyone else will be catching up on the replay. Okay, so before we dive into all the content, I've got a lot to share with you today. Get your pen and paper ready to take notes. And as we move through, even though you can only hear me and I can't hear you at the moment, I want this to be more of a conversation, and I've got a lot to share, but if you've got comments to make, please put them in the chat box as we move through. And if you've got questions, pop them in that chat box as well. I've got Andrew here with us today. He's currently in New Zealand. He's based in Sydney. And Andrew is one of the members of the Peer Practice Program. And he's going to be helping me out in that chat box, answering your questions as they come in and helping me filter those questions for the Q&A at the end. So go ahead at any time that a question pops up into your head, please pop it in that chat and we'll get to it either through the discussion or at the end in the Q&A. Get your pen and paper ready. I'm ready to dive on in and start to share with you my strategies for preparing for assessment so that it's more enjoyable, less stressful, and so that at the end, you want to recall it as a good time, as a happy memory, not something you're trying to get over and done with as quickly as possible. Okay, so just give me a second, and what I'm going to do is share my screen with you. Here we go. And I'm going to just jump into there. Okay, cool. Great. There's my screen so you can, I'm going to have a few slides there to help you take note as we move along. And I've just got my notes in front of me. If you wonder why I'm reaching forward, I've got my notes there that I'm just adjusting. Okay, so where to begin? In today's session, I'm going to give you a little quick rundown of what I'm going to cover. We're going to cover planning your time and how to be efficient in your study. So really looking at focused practice time so that it's really efficient, so that every time you get on the mat, you can see how you're progressing and taking steps towards the final goal. I'm going to talk about creating goals and bigger picture plans so that you're focused and you know where you're going and you can really map out that, that plan and that course. And then the last thing I'm going to share with you is about networks and support, and how you don't have to do this alone, and how by including people in your assessment preparation, it's far more enjoyable and, dare I say the word, fun. So all of these strategies are things that you can walk away from this video today with tips and strategies that you can implement immediately. I'm going to step you through some of them in a bit more detail, some a little bit more quickly, but you'll get the idea. And I'm going to step through so that you can walk away and implement these into your practice immediately and already start to feel more on track in your assessment preparations. So a big part of the stress that we feel when we are leading and preparing for assessment comes from the unknown. It comes from the stress is about what we don't know. For example, who's going to be on the assessment panel, like what senior teachers, boom, boom, or what poses that we're going to be given in the assessment, and not knowing what those poses are and never knowing until the moment they're actually given to us. Not knowing the studio that we're doing the assessment in, not being familiar to us. All these sorts of things, the unknown, the things that we don't know and don't have control over, tend to be what we put a lot of, what tends to cause our stress. And these things are essentially out of our control and not worth stressing about. So what I really like to focus on and put my energy into is what I do know and what I can control. And these strategies are around that, around focusing on what we have control of, what we can focus on, so that we know where we're going, rather than flailing around, stressing about things that are just out of our control and you'll never be able to control. So these three strategies are what ground me, and they are grounded on what you can do to take control of your assessment journey, so that you feel ahead of the game and that you know that you've done everything that you could possibly do to prepare yourself as best as you possibly can, so that on the day, as well as doing your best, you have to also just put your hands up and go, it's out of my control. I think that preparing for assessment is like the ultimate yogic practice, because the practice of yoga is about controlling the mind and about learning how to better deal with more stressful situations that come up in our lives. So I think that it's like the ultimate practice. Assessment is a test to our yoga practice. Okay, so let's start with my first strategy, which is about preparing your practice and planning your practice time so that you're really efficient on the mat. Now, I hate to state the glaringly obvious, but practice and a regular practice are a surefire way to a successful assessment. It's all about practice. Yoga is a practice. So if you don't have a regular practice, that's where you've got to start. Really practicing every single day is the key. And that wasn't a problem for me, and it isn't. I can confidently say getting on the mat daily is not my problem, hasn't been my problem for a long time. When I first started, it certainly was. I've got that one under check, but it was really about being efficient on the mat and making my practice time worthwhile and seeing that I was making good progress. I'm going to share with you some strategies for being organized. And it was a really big game changer in my assessment preparation, when not only did I start allocating 2 or 3 hours to a single practice each week that was specifically for assessment preparation, but that before I got on the mat for that 2 or 3 hour session, I had planned what I was going to do in that time. So I'm going to talk you through the different strategies that I go through myself to be efficient in my practice time. So that first strategy is printing out 5 copies of your syllabus. And what happens is when we first get a syllabus for a new syllabus for our next level, or if it's our first level, it's daunting. There's just a whole heap of poses on there, potentially some that you're familiar with and many that you're not familiar with. So we need to get familiar with that syllabus. And so what I like to do is I print out 5 copies of the syllabus and I get a pack of highlighters. And then on one of those copies, I'll go through and just color code all of the poses so that they're organized by category. So for example, I'll use a green highlighter for all the standing poses and a blue highlighter for the back bends and a pink highlighter for inversions and so on. So that already I'm starting to get familiar with this new syllabus, and rather than it just being a whole page and jumble of poses, it's organized by category. So I know, oh, okay, they are the back bends that I need to get familiar with. They're the arm balances I need to get familiar with, and so on. And then I will actually start to apply that into my practice. And I'm going to talk you through, I think I've got 3 or perhaps 4 methods here that I'm going to talk you through and how I begin. And I have just recently done this for my junior intermediate 2 syllabus. I did this practice method 1 quite a few months ago, but this is how I began. So I will do my regular yoga practice, but I will grab one of those categories of poses and add it into my practice. So I'll be doing my regular practice knowing that I'm going to add in this chunk of this category. So it might be that I've chosen the back bend category and I'm going to add that in to my regular practice. So what I'm trying to do is just start to practice those new poses, those new syllabus of poses more regularly and get more familiar with them and take away that fear of I don't know them, I don't know what they look like, I don't know how to do them, and just start to practice them, just start to include them. You do them in any way that you can to your capacity, but it's starting to just break the ice and get familiar with those poses. Let me just have a little sip because I'm doing a lot of talking. Okay, and just give me 1 second there. I've lost the chat box now that I'm sharing my screen with you. I just want to see if I can see it. No, I can't. We'll jump back to that later. That's why I've left the Q&A to the end so that I can see all of those chats as we move through. Okay, so that's the first practice method. Just start to categorize the poses and then start practicing them. And don't be like too fussed about it. I just want you to get familiar with them and start to include them in your practice rather than what we do is we go, oh my God, I don't know how to do that. And we just avoid it. And then we're really not making any progress at all. The second category, second method, now I've just lost control here of my screen. Give me a second. You're going to let me move. There we go. So this is what it might look like. I've got my syllabus there and I've highlighted and categorized the poses. So it's really easy at a glance to go, great, I'm just going to grab the green category and throw them into my practice. And then I'll just do a whole bunch of standings. And then I can go on and do whatever else I was going to do in my practice. So let me just recap. I like to recap because I share a lot of information. The first thing you want to do is allocate a 2 to 3 hour session, individual practice session once a week. And in that time, you're going to do a practice that is focused on your assessment. The first strategy is to just categorize the poses. And then in that 2 hour practice session, you do your regular practice, but you throw in one of those categories. The second method is to create a sequence which includes a couple of categories of poses. So rather than doing your regular sequence, you're going to grab 2 of those categories, which will probably be quite significant and chunky because a lot of the poses in the syllabus are, and then top and tail it. So if you know that you're going to do perhaps the back bends and then the arm balances, top it with a few standing poses, tail it with perhaps your inversions and your savangasana so that you can prepare and then wind down. And again, this is just all about having a focus when you get on the mat. So when you get on the mat, you're not wasting your time figuring out what you're going to do. You know before you get on the mat what you're going to do. And then when you're on the mat, you're efficient and you're like moving through and you're starting to just nail those poses and get confident with them. Okay. So the third practice method is to create an entire sequence from your syllabus. And you just go through the whole syllabus and grab 2 or 3 asanas from each category, put them in an order that looks good, and then off you go. So we're just starting to include a few, and then a few more, and then a few more. So then you find that your practice becomes seamlessly including a lot of the syllabus poses, and you're just getting more and more confident with practicing them, more and more confident then to be able to teach them. But we have to practice them in our body and get familiar with them first before we can start to bust them out onto our students and start teaching them. So there's the 3 practice methods that I like to implement just to get familiar with the syllabus, but also so that when I'm on the mat, I'm efficient and I know what I'm doing. So then I won't just leave it at that. I will then take notes. So this is why I say a 2 or 3 hour session, because you're going to practice and then you want to take notes on that practice and document what you discovered, what you learned, Take notes about a pose that you have no idea about and don't know anything, and make a note that you need to give that one more focus, or you can make notes about the ones that you're more confident with. So you start to compile sort of an inventory of knowledge, and then I'll put that into a Google Sheet or a Google Doc. So if you haven't met me before and you don't know me very well, I'm like on the scale when it comes to organizing. I really like to organize and categorize everything. It just helps me feel in control, be able to map my progress and track my journey, so that it's kind of not everything just flailing around and not being sure of where I'm at. So that I've planned my practice, and then I get on the mat and I do my practice, and at the end of the practice I document what I've kind of learned or discovered. I don't do this every single practice, don't get me wrong. This is my focused assessment preparation practice that I'll do once a week. And then I've documented what I've learned in that practice, so that then for my next practice it's practically planned already, because I'm just taking off from where I left off last time, so that it's more efficient. And I'm not spending hours figuring out what I'm going to do. It's really clear because I've gone through all of those steps. Okay, so as well as documenting, and I can talk till the cows come home about how you might go about documenting your practice, whether or not you use like little cue cards or spreadsheets or Google Docs, or you have a notebook. You've got to find a way that works for you. I could do a whole other session on that, but let's leave that for another day because we don't have time today. So before I move on to my next strategy, which is about the big picture planning, I'd love to see if there's any questions specific to those strategies that I was just talking about. So I'm just going to stop the screen share for a second so that I can see that chat box and just jump in there. Cool. Great, I'm seeing everyone's comments there now. We've got people from the US and Canada with us. I'm going to have a drink. I'm going to give you a chance to pop any questions in there right now about what I've just talked about planning your practice, having a few strategies for organizing your practice. And Andrew's also in there helping you with any technical questions as well. If you're having trouble seeing me, there's a little box in the top right hand corner with a whole bunch of squares on it. You can click that and that will change the view of what you're seeing if you're not seeing me. That should help. And as Andrew said, it depends on what device you're watching on. If you're on a phone or an iPad, usually the options are a bit hard to navigate. Okay, I don't see any questions jumping in right now. Will you supply these notes? Yes, Bly, I will. I can do that. At the very end, you'll have to give me a minute. At the very end, I'm gonna be able to provide these PDF notes for you, and I'll create a link in there. It'll just take me a moment at the end, but that'll be good at the end of the Q&A. We can sort that out. Good question, because if you're not taking notes, you're gonna wanna have these with you. Okay, I will. And cool. All right, let's move on. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. There's a bit of back and forth here, but that's the technical world I'm living in. Here we go. Cool. So my next point of discussion was to talk about the big picture. So I heard someone's just jumped into the live video here. If you've missed anything, hold tight, there will be a replay. Just jump in with me now, we'll follow along, and you can catch what you missed at the very beginning. But just a quick recap, I've just talked about how to be more organized in planning your practice so that when you're on the mat it's more efficient, and then how to follow up that practice with notes so that when you go to your practice next time, you know where you're at. And you know what this is all about. Like, these strategies I'm sharing with you today are really about taking the stress away, because as I said, the stress is often around two things. One, what we don't know and what is out of our control, and this kind of hugeness of it, like feeling like there's so much to learn and so much to retain, and how you're going to learn it all and retain it all and keep it all and be able to have it up until the end. So this is what my strategies are about, removing that stress by being organized and planned and having strategies to contain that information and that learning. Okay, so the big picture plan, so that you've got to focus every single month in the lead up to your assessment. And so what I discussed before was about your practice, and more specifically about each week, what you're going to practice in your assessment preparation. And practice is like the biggest thing. I could go on and on about it. You can't, I mean, I create a whole business around having a regular and consistent and inspired practice. So practice is where it's all at. But as well as practice, having a bigger view, and then all of your little practices come in underneath that big plan. So I like to create a practice, a big picture plan at least 3 months before I go for assessment, but I'll usually do it sort of more in around the 4 to 6 months beforehand. And this is where I like to map out, like, so that I make sure I don't forget or miss anything. So I will use that that plan to map out what I want to get covered in every single month. So what you need to do, first of all, is write a list of everything that you want to do or that you need to do to be 100% prepared for your assessment before you go. So in that list of things, I'll start to list a few now to give you an idea. You will want to include things like you need to do your assessment application. You want to have your study notes. You want to practice regularly. You want to have practice the poses you're not familiar with. You want to teach the poses you're not familiar with. You want to have time with your senior teacher to ask questions. You want to probably do some mock assessments where you have like a pretend assessment situation and you go through the whole motions and you teach your 5 poses in a certain amount of time. You probably want to demonstrate your practice in front of your senior teacher or in front of some peers or other teachers to get feedback. So these are all the things that you need to do to be 100% ready, right? So you create this list, and that's how you start. You're just going to write on a piece of paper everything you can think of that you want to do and make sure you've done and checked off before you go for assessment. And then you will add it into a little calendar. So here I'm just giving you a really simple example of what I would have. I would like literally have an A4 piece of paper. I've made this one all nice with straight lines for you, but I'd probably just get an A4 piece of paper and divide it up with 2 months per paper. Now, if this is going to let me, I'll cleverly be able to write on this document so you can see. So in the top box there, I'll put the month. So just say I'm doing this 3 months before I go for assessment, and I'll put the month there. And then I'll also include what I want my main focus to be in that month. So say it's like 4 months out before assessment, and I have to do my assessment application. That's going to be the key thing that I make sure happens in that month. And then I want to mark out what I'm going to do each week. Now, to get to this point, you need to be clear on what your weaknesses are, what your strengths are. I've got a whole bunch of tools and games that I play to do that. Like I'll create lists of the poses that I'm not familiar with and lists of the poses that I am familiar with, so that I know where I need to focus and what I need to put less time into. So perhaps in this first week of the month leading up, I'm going to focus on least familiar poses. And then that's going to be what my focus is in that week. That I'm just looking only at, so in my practice time, in my assessment practice time, which is the 2 or 3 hours I've allocated, I'm going to focus on poses in that practice that are ones that I'm really not confident with. And then perhaps in the second week, I'm going to practice more familiar poses. And then perhaps in the third week, I'm going to have a go at teaching the familiar poses, the ones that I'm confident with. And then in the last week, I might tackle teaching poses that I'm not confident with. So I start to break the ice on there. So my writing's going off the screen, but you're going to get the gist of how I'm mapping this out. And then in the next one, I'm going to put the month name, and then my focus that month might be on just updating my asana cards. can't spell, my cards or notes, however I'm categorizing my information. Okay, and sorry, one of my screens blacked out there. There we go. So that's what I'll do. I'll go through and just map out. Now, this doesn't have to be locked in concrete, but what I find it helps is that you make sure everything on that list there gets put into this schedule and into this calendar. And then this also helps that when you're planning your 2 or 3 hour practice and what you're going to do in that focused assessment practice time, you're not starting from scratch going, oh, what should I do? You jump to here and you go, cool, this week I said I'd cover my least familiar poses. Great. So it also helps us to stop avoiding the things we really don't want to do. Lock it in here and then you'll actually do them and tick them off. And if you're like, oh, I'm not ready, then you can shift it around and move it to another week, but that you know that you're going to cover it and you're not going to miss anything, so that by the end, you've ticked all the boxes, you've crossed all the T's, you've dotted all of the I's, and you're feeling 100% ready and totally confident that you have done everything you could to get ready. As I said, these strategies are around taking control of what we can control, creating clear pathways to lead us to where we want to get without the flailing and the unsureness. How does that sound? I'm going to jump back in and check if there's any comments there around that before I move on to our last strategy, which is about support networks and creating support and community and looking at who is around you to help you on your journey towards assessment. Okay, let me see any comments there. I'm going to give you another minute. I'll have another sip of my tea. If there's any questions specifically around that kind of planning per month and each week in the month, which leads up to your assessment. Okay, nothing coming in. That's good. That must mean it was pretty clear and straightforward. Okay, let me go finally back to sharing my screen one more time. Here we go. And take you through building a team. If you're lucky like me, well, let me jump back a second first. Like, you don't have to do this alone. I think that as yoga practitioners and on this assessment path, we often feel alone, especially if you don't have like yoga friends or yoga buddies. They don't know what you're talking about, especially if you start using Sanskrit and they don't even know what the syllabus is, or even the complexity or the hugeness of what an assessment involves. You know, perhaps their last memory of assessment is just like doing their year 12 exams, which, you know, are pretty stressful, but that was long gone in their memory. So people don't really understand what we are going through when we're preparing for assessment and how stressful it is and how big a deal it is for us. It's not an easy path to follow. And you don't have to do it alone. And I think it's really important that you don't do it alone, but you have to find who it is that you can have around you to support you. And it's probably not going to be your best friend because they don't know what you're talking about. So I'm going to talk about exactly the kind of people you want to have around you. Like any professional athlete preparing for a competition, they have a support team. They're not on their own. They have, you know, a whole team there, whether it be their mindset coach and their physiotherapist and then their training coach and they're this coach and they're that coach. That's what I'm wanting you to think about. Like, we are like professional athletes and we need a team around us to support us. Now, I'm going to kind of talk you through two teams, the A team and the B team. Now, I'm not going to go into details about the B team. I'll just give you an idea of what I'm talking about because that's really kind of personal and optional. The A team is essential and non-negotiable, and I'm going to go into detail about who that includes and how they can be involved in your assessment preparation. The B team, I like to think of, you know, they're nice to have around. They're not essential though. And that might be like your physio or your masseuse or your best friend who you can have a cry on the shoulder about. But the A team is what I really want to focus on today. So the A team, let me jump there, is, let's go through them, is your senior teacher, is first and foremost your senior teacher. And if you're lucky like me to work at a studio where you have your senior teacher attached to the studio and the school, you can ask them questions. But often for many of us, this is not the case. And often the senior teacher is far away. You only see them every few months. You don't necessarily have a close relationship with them. It really depends on the agreement that you have with your senior teacher. But first and foremost, they are your main trainer. They're the one who are going to answer those big questions for you and give you kind of that approval and give you that move along kind of support as you progress, and keep kind of checking in with you that you are moving along and that you are ready, because they don't want you to go for assessment if you're not ready. So making sure though that you really are using your senior teacher to the maximum that you can, depending on the agreement that you have with them. I think that often we are intimidated by our senior teachers, or we're too afraid to ask them the 1,000 questions that we have, or perhaps they're not that accessible because you're remote. But if your relationship allows, I really encourage you to make the most of your senior teacher. Ask them as much as you can. And you know what, if you're feeling afraid to, or often don't go forth and ask the questions you want to, I'm challenging you to do that now. That is their role. I think that senior teachers hold a big role, and they need to be held accountable to that role. And go ahead and ask them. The worst they can say is no. And then you're no worse off. You just know you need to find the answer somewhere else. But I really encourage you to not be afraid of your senior teacher, to really make the most of them. Now, the second kind of group in your A team is having students. So some of you may already work at studios where you can where you teach, and you've got a regular cohort of students. Some of you may not even be teaching yet. Some of you might not have a core studio. You kind of jump around or work at community places. So having a variety of students of various levels, so from beginners, intermediate, and experienced, so that you've got a diverse range of students to practice your teaching on. It's really, really critical to be able to access those students so that you can practice your teaching, which is essential for assessment. And having a range really helps as well, because then those more beginner students who can't do the poses, you can look at, you're really going to learn there about modifying and adjusting. And those students who can do the poses, you can really take them through to the final pose and experience like that full teaching on students who can actually do the poses. Okay, so let me just move along and check my notes that I haven't forgotten anything about that. If you don't have a studio that you teach on, or you don't teach regular classes, I really encourage you to grab some friends who are into doing yoga and use them as your guinea pigs to practice teaching on. That's how I first started before I started teaching at the studio. I had a friend around the corner. I'd go around to her house every week, once a week at 6 a.m. and I'd teach her for a full hour. And then I'd go home and make notes on that teaching, and that was sort of where it started. So I think having a few friends, and that was just one, if you can got 1, 2, or 3 that you can get together on a regular basis and teach, that's going to be beneficial to your teaching, to your confidence, and to getting feedback. Like, ask your students after a class, how was it? What worked for you? How did you find that pose? Did that work? Was that easier? You know, like, there's no problem in asking them and getting feedback from them. It's going to help you to better understand what's working and what's not working in your teaching. And then the last, but probably I would say the most essential, is having other teachers and trainees and peers at your fingertips that you can call on in your assessment preparation. Trainees and teachers of different levels that you can practice with, that you can practice your teaching on, especially those challenging poses, that you can bounce ideas off, that you can talk to about their previous assessment sequences, you can share your fears and concerns with. Having other teachers and trainees around to support you in that way is really, really, really beneficial, especially because they're your peers, they're on your level, and you can really be honest and open with them. And, you know, rather than trying to figuring it out all on your own, which you just don't have to do. There's definitely a certain degree of which you just have to practice and learn it in your body. But every time you hit a wall, it just doesn't end there. You've got someone to go, hey, when I was doing this pose, I got stuck here. What do you think about this? Or how does that work for you? And having people to really bounce ideas off is key to progressing in that practice, but also having more fun. Practicing on your own in this solo journey can be really hard. So doing it with other people, more enjoyable, more sharing, and that sharing of knowledge and sharing of experience is so enriching. And this really leads me to talk about what I mentioned at the very beginning, which is about the peer practice program and why I created it. Because when I first was going for my, preparing for my junior intermediate 1 assessment, there was no one at my studio who had gone for it before. I was sort of, I was wanting people who had already gone for it or who were preparing for it to work with. So I went onto Facebook and I looked for a Facebook group that might have already existed, and I was amazed to find there was one, and I was very excited, and I joined it, and then I posted in there saying, who wants to practice the junior intermediate sequence with me? Knowing that we could use, you know, like Facebook video or something like that. And then silence, crickets, nothing. I heard nothing, and I was completely like, oh, this group exists, but it's got no life to it. Actually, it's a graveyard and nothing's happening here. So I kind of knew I was looking for peers who I could work with at my level, but didn't know where to find them. So that's why I created the peer practice program. I literally, 6 months ago, when I'm not the only one. There's more people out there who are wanting other peers to practice with. So I put it out there, and it's been really well taken on and accepted by people like myself, probably by people like you, who feel like they're doing it alone and who want other people around them to practice and study with. And it's been running for 6 months now. It's quite a small group so that everyone gets seen and heard, and we can all ask questions. It's all done in live sessions using software like this in Zoom, where we can see and hear each other. So obviously in today's settings, I've just set it up so that you can just see and hear me, but it's got the capability that we can all see and hear each other. So we get together every single week and we practice together, and someone will lead the practice. Often I will, or someone else will volunteer to, and we lead different poses or from different syllabus. There's a whole range of trainees and teachers in the program, including trainees who haven't gone for assessment yet, intro trainees preparing for junior 1, and junior 1 preparing for junior 2. So there's quite a range there, and it's amazing the sharing and how we can all support each other in that journey. So as well as practicing together, we also get together and teach each other, and teach each other those tricky poses and look at how someone's teaching it and get ideas about how we could try teaching it. So it really sort of starts to break down and get into the nitty-gritty of, especially when you hit those walls in your own practice with a pose. You've got someone here to go, hey, how do you practice that? And you bounce off each other. And as well as like the teaching and the practice, we also have discussions, really meaty, juicy discussions about the stress, the fear, the worries, all of those things that are there brewing, but we can share and talk to each other about those things in this group. So that's kind of how it works, and I absolutely love it. I'm just going to jump out of this peer practice program screenshot right now and get back into, so that I can see your faces or at least your screens. So the good thing is that it's open for enrollments, the peer practice program. It's a small group, as I mentioned, so that everyone can be seen and heard. We often all the sessions are live, so it does depend on where you're living, but we change the live session times every couple of months. It kind of revolves around the hemisphere, depending on where you are. It's a more suitable time for you. And its enrollments are open right now. So I only open the enrollments sort of 3 times a year when places become available, which is right now and only until the 28th. So a few days away, until the end of the week, our enrollments open, because we're going to start the new month in August. So if this sounds like something that you'd be interested in, coming together with people all around the world, it's pretty amazing. There are literally people from Argentina, Mexico, Malaysia, the UK, the US, Australia. There's a student in India, like people from all around the world. And we come together and we practice and we teach and we talk. And then it all continues in a private Facebook group as well, where the conversation keeps going and people can post in there. So it's nothing like a dead graveyard Facebook group at all. It's very engaged, it's very active, and you can sign up and register now. I'm actually going to go ahead and pop in a link right there into the chat so that you can jump in and find out more about it. Let me just do that now. And all the details are there in this link, so you can jump in, find out that. It's $49 a month, and you just pay, it's a monthly subscription, so you can start and cancel anytime. When you cancel, you just exit the group. As long as your subscription's up to date, you can join in all of the sessions. So all the sessions get recorded, like this video is being recorded today. And that means that it all gets then kept in a library. So if you can't join a live session, you just jump into the library and watch the replay. And that happens for a lot of members because of the time zone differences. But before the session, they'll submit their questions, or they'll submit the poses that they want covered, so that when they go back to the replay, there's answers there. They're able to make progress. Like, yep, Murray Chestnut one, I asked for that. Someone's taught it. Cool, now I can move on and practice that myself. So whether or not you join the live sessions or the replays, it's all there, and it's all hosted in a portal that you can log in and access at any time that suits you. So the link is there. I want to now go to, so you can find out more, and all the details are in there, and register. Keeping in mind there are only, I think now 7 or 6 places left. As I said, it's a small group. Enrollment's only open for a limited time because we want to keep those numbers small. So if you're keen, don't hesitate. But you can ask me any questions now. I'm just going to check the list here. Any questions about anything I've talked about in this live video? Any questions about preparing for assessment that you might want to ask me? All of these sort of strategies that I've gone through today, I go through in much more detail in the peer practice program, and heaps of others as well. So every month in the peer practice program, I release what I call a resource kit. And it's basically a step-by-step kind of activity that you can follow step by step, and it will help you to do things like schedule your time, do your goals and your plan and your goal setting, or how to organize all your study notes. So I have really kind of step-by-step activities within the peer practice program that I release each month, and then you can do them in your free time as you work through all the other content. All right. I'm not seeing any, can you show us a sample of your notes on an asana? Do you know what, I can, hold on one second. I've got it in my notebook there. This is kind of like an old version. This is how I started, but I'm going to jump up and show it with you. Just give me a tick. So when I first went for my very, very first assessment, this is how I did it. I had these little cards, and I bound them. That's what I do. It's kind of geeky, but yes, at the very end, I bound them all. So I had my own little light on yoga, Kate's light on yoga. Anyway, so I had these cards, and if I hold it close enough to the screen, you probably get an idea, although it's probably might be reversed. But I'll basically put the name of the pose at the top. I'll have the light on yoga plate number, and then I'll put like the 3 key poses that key instructions, key actions that I want to teach in that pose. This is for my intro level. And then at the bottom there, I might have a comment about what the menstruator will do, or what modifications I would offer in that asana. So basically I would do that for every single pose in the syllabus. And then as I practice and I work in those poses, I've scribbled down, like you can't see here, but you can tell they've been erased and rewritten and erased about 1,000 times. So I would just keep rubbing out and add a new note and go, oh, that's not relevant anymore. I've found a better way to say that. And I would just keep adding. So I've kind of got it like my little inventory of information here. I now do this in a Google spreadsheet. I've gone a bit technical. But I do still have a notebook so that when I'm practicing, I don't have my computer next to me. I don't like that. When I'm practicing, I will still scribble my notes out and things that I'm wanting to jot down, and then I'll transfer that to my Google spreadsheet. But that hopefully gives you an idea, Panita. I hope that answers your question about how I do my notes. Okay, cool. You did get that. Great. So if there's any other questions, please pop them into the chat right now. And I'll give you another minute before we wrap this session up. I think we might be done, but I want to give you another chance in case anything comes to mind that you want to ask me about. Otherwise, it's been wonderful. I've loved sharing these tips with you. They've been really helpful for me in all of my assessments, and I continue to do them. It's not like I did them and went, great, that's done. Like, I'm going from my junior intermediate to, I'm going through all the same motions. But it just feels really like, yep, this is the process. I'm not stressed. I'm not wondering how to do it. I just know I have to go and leap through all of these hoops and jump all of these hurdles. And then when I get to that end date, I'll be ready, 100% ready and confident. And then it's just about me giving what I've got and teaching what I know. Cool. I don't think there's any more questions. There's just lots of thank yous. My pleasure. Check out that link for the peer practice program. I look forward to having a few of you join us in that group and sharing your knowledge with the rest of us as we progress in a really, like, I can't kind of express enough the peer practice program group. It's just like an incredible bunch of people who are really devoted, really interested and motivated and inspired in their practice, and so keen to share. And that's what I love about it, the sharing of knowledge and the love of yoga. All right, thanks everyone.